Chapter 4, Section 4.1. So our last section, we talked a lot about graphing equations, and now we're going to talk about writing equations. So instead of using the visuals and the graphs, we're going to be doing more of the algebra side of it, the numbers and the letters. So it says, use slope and y-intercept to write an equation. Well, in order to write a linear equation, we like to write it in slope-intercept form, which if you remember from last chapter is y equals mx plus b, and hopefully you remember that m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So if they give you, it says write an equation of the line with a slope of 1/2 and a y-intercept of -4, it should be really easy to write the equation for this line. Because remember, all you need is the slope and the y-intercept, and they give it to you. So y is equal to my slope, which is 1/2, x, and my y-intercept, which is -7. It is as simple as that. If they give you the slope and they give you the y-intercept, all you have to do is plug it into slope-intercept form, and that's it. So for number 1, on exercises, remember we're working with y equals mx plus b. And if I want to write equation in slope-intercept form, I need the slope and I need the y-intercept. Those are the two things I always need to fill in. Well, number 1, they give you just that. They give you the slope and they give you the y-intercept. So y is equal, filling in for m and filling in for b, my m is 2/3 plus my b, which is -11. You could change that to just -11. Again, you are replacing m and b. Anytime you want to write the equation of a line, you are replacing m and b, the slope and the y-intercept. So moving on to number 2, this should get simpler and simpler. Y is equal to my slope, -7/5 x minus 2. Okay, example 2. It says write an equation of a line given 2 points. Okay, well, what are the 2 things that you need to write an equation? You need the slope and you need the y-intercept. Well, let's look at this line. Can we identify those things? Looks like we can. The y-intercept should be easy because that's where it crosses the y-axis. Where does this line cross the y-axis at? Here, at 2. Right? Where y is equal to 2 is where I cross the y-axis. The slope can be found using rise over run. So I start at my 1 point, and in order to find my slope, I have to go to my next point. That next point is going to make me go down 1, 2, 3, so -3, and then in the positive direction, 2. So my equation is going to be y is equal to -3/2 x plus 2. My slope is -3/2, down 3/2, and my y-intercept, where my graph crosses the y-axis, is at 2. Remember, where my graph crosses the y-axis is always when x is 0. It's going to be very important in these next couple of problems. So number 3 says write an equation of the line that passes through the given points. Remember, you need 2 things when you're writing the equation of a line: the slope and the y-intercept. They're not always going to give those things to you right away. Sometimes you're going to have to find them, just like we did up here. So let's find the slope. Well, if we can look back to last chapter, we know that if we are given 2 points, we can use those 2 points use our slope formula and find our slope. So if we label these, we can use these 2 points to find the slope very easily. So we have y2, which is -1, minus y1, which is 4, over 0 minus 10. Again, all we're doing is following that slope formula from the last chapter. If we were to simplify this, -1 minus 4 is -5, divided by 0 minus 10, which is -10. A negative divided by a negative becomes a positive, and I can simplify 5/10 to 1/2. So, nothing that you guys have not done before, okay? Remember, when you're writing the equation of a line, you need the slope and the y-intercept. If you are given 2 points, you can easily find the slope, which is what we just did. Now, how about finding the y-intercept? Well, in this case, hopefully you realize one of these points, 10, 4, 0, -1, the x is 0. And what does it mean when x is 0? Remember up here, when x was 0, that is where we cross the y-axis. So they actually give you the y-intercept. And in this case, our y-intercept is -1. So when x is 0 is how you can find your y-intercept. So if they give you a point when x is 0, that is going to be your y-intercept. Then we write our equation. Y is equal to mx plus b. We found our m to be 1/2. And we found our b to be -1. You can either do plus a -1 or just change it to -1. That's up to you. Let's go ahead and do number 4. What are the 2 things that you need to write the equation of a line? The slope and the y-intercept. And you are going to hear me say that again and again and again. You need the slope and you need the y-intercept. So step 1, let's find the slope. We're following that same equation that we did up here, the same slope equation. So let's label our points and fill in. So y2, which is -1, minus y1, which is 8, all over 5 minus 0. -1 minus 8, or -1 plus a -8, whichever you prefer. So you're in the negatives, you're going further into the negatives, is -9. And 5 minus 0 is 5. Therefore, my slope is -9/5. Now to find the y-intercept. Hopefully you realize that they gave you the y-intercept right away. Remember, the y-intercept is when x equals 0 and they give you a point that the line goes through where x is 0. So my y-intercept is 8. So my equation is y is equal to -9/5 x plus 8. Y is equal to mx plus b. We can do the same thing here, but we do it with functions, okay? Remember that f of 0 equals 7 and f of 12 equals 15. Well, that's the same thing as f of x equals y, okay? If we know what x is, our 0, we know that y is our 7, we can write each of these functions as a coordinate and then go through the same process. So if our x is 0, our y comes out to be 7. So 0, 7 is the first coordinate. And if our x is 12 and our y is 15, then we can also write that second coordinate. So all you have to do with these is change these to coordinates before you go through the same process here. So what are the 2 things you need to write in the equation? In slope-intercept form, your m and your b. And in this case, your final answer should be written in function form when you're done. So let's find the m, the slope. I'm going to go through this one a little bit quicker. 15 minus 7 over 12 minus 0 is equal to 8 over 12. And if I simplify that, that becomes 2 over 3. Then I also know that my y-intercept, my b, is going to be 7 because 0, 7. My x is 0, that means 7 is my y-intercept. So I write this as y equals 2/3 x plus 7. But because I'm asking you to do this in function form, you need to give me your answer in function form. So instead of y, simply just write f of x is equal to 2/3 x plus 7. Again, function f of x, that's just a different notation for y.